The trip was meant to be simple, a couple of nights in Castlemaine to clear my head. The place I booked was old, carrying the scent of dust and aged wood, its walls heavy with untold stories. By day, it seemed ordinary, just worn with time. I tossed my bag on the bed, glanced around, and went on with my evening, unaware of what waited in the dark. Dinner in town was quiet, relaxing. I took my time, had a drink, let the evening slip by without rush. By the time I returned, night had fully settled in, casting everything into that unsettling stillness that only exists in small, sleeping towns. The moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first, just an almost imperceptible shift, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. The house felt darker, the corners swallowing more than just shadows. The lamps still burned, but their glow seemed faded, like the light had aged in the span of a few hours. I told myself it was nothing, just fatigue, just the isolation playing tricks on me. Then I saw it. A hole. It hadn't been there before, or at least I hadn't noticed it. A gaping black void in the ceiling near the center of the room. My breath hitched as I stared up at it. How had I missed something like that? It wasn't just a crack or some minor damage. It was a tunnel into darkness. The kind of hole that looked like it didn't just lead into the attic, but into something else entirely. I took a cautious step forward. The edges of the hole weren't clean. They were jagged, almost organic, like something had forced its way through. My stomach turned. I told myself it was just an old house, that maybe something had collapsed or rotted away. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt it, that suffocating, unnatural wrongness that came from something that shouldn't be. Then the spiders started coming through. At first I only saw one, a single long-legged shadow unfolding itself from the void above, creeping its way down the ceiling. A huntsman. Large, but nothing I hadn't seen before. Then another, and another. My pulse quickened. My breath grew shallow. Within seconds, there were too many to count. They moved together, an unsettling tide of limbs and bodies spilling out of the hole like ink dripping from a wound. They weren't just crawling, they were spreading. The ceiling was alive with them, a shifting, writhing mass of bodies the size of dinner plates, their legs skittering over the walls, the furniture, the floor. My brain screamed at me to move, to run, to get out of there, but my body refused to obey. I could only watch in growing horror as more and more emerged, as they filled every inch of space, as the soft sound of their legs clicking against the walls became deafening. Then, in the middle of it all, I saw something else. The hole wasn't just a hole. It wasn't just a crack in the ceiling or a passage to the attic. It was something deeper, something wrong. And within that darkness, something moved. At first, it was just a shape, a shifting, pulsing presence lurking just beyond the swarm. But as the spiders continued to spill forth, I saw it more clearly. A face, not a human face, not even close. It was vague, almost indistinct, but it was there. Shadowy, unformed yet present. Its eyes too dim, reddish glows watched me from the darkness, unmoving, unblinking. A sickening realization crept into my mind. The spiders weren't fleeing from it. They were coming from it. They weren't just emerging from the hole. They were part of whatever was in there, pouring out of it like an extension of its body. I heard something then, a whisper, a low, shivering sound that wasn't words but still sent an unmistakable message. It sees you. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember running out the door. But suddenly, I was outside, my chest heaving, my hands shaking as I threw myself into the car and slammed the door shut. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My skin crawled with the phantom sensation of legs skittering over me. I looked back at the house. The windows were dark. The spider hundreds of them clung to the glass, their bodies forming strange patterns, shapes I didn't want to understand. And behind them, deep in the shadows of that unholy hole in the ceiling, the face still watched. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing, red-tinged eyes. I heard the whisper, felt the weight of something lurking just beyond the veil of reality. At dawn, when the sky bled weak light over the horizon, I forced myself to go back inside. I had to. My things were still in there. My wallet, my beige everything I had brought with me. The house was silent. No spiders, no whispers, no shifting figures lurking in the dark. The hole remained, but it seemed smaller now, less unnatural. Maybe exhaustion had twisted my perception. Maybe I had imagined the worst, but the air was still thick, stale heavy with something unshakable. I threw my things together in record time, each movement careful, silent. I barely breathed. The feeling of being watched never left me. Not by the windows, not by the ceiling, by something deeper. Something that didn't need to be seen to be felt. I left the key on the table. I didn't lock the door. I didn't look back. The car engine rumbled to life, and I drove. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. Castlemaine faded behind me, swallowed by the night, a place I would never return to. And whatever was in that house, I don't think it ever stayed behind.
You have 10 seconds to get more snacks and like the video. You shouldn't play with terror.
I never liked cruises too many people, too much structure. But I needed a break, and this one was cheap. 7 days at sea with nothing but a book and open water sounded like the perfect escape. From the moment I boarded, something felt off. The ship was too quiet, not in a peaceful way, but like the hush before a storm. Passengers spoke in low voices, their eyes darting as if afraid to be overheard. The first couple of days passed uneventfully. I lounged on the deck, watched the waves, and tried to ignore the unease in my gut. But at dinner, I noticed him. A man dressed in black, always sitting alone at a corner table. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, obscuring his features. He never ate, never spoke, just sat there staring straight ahead. I told myself he was just another eccentric traveler. But on the third night, something changed. I was in my cabin, reading, when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I hesitated. Maybe a crew member? A lost passenger? Setting my book aside, I opened the door. No one was there. The hallway stretched out empty, the soft creak of the ship the only sound. I stepped out, glancing both ways. Nothing. With a shrug, I shut the door, convincing myself it was a prank. But as I settled back into bed, a cold sensation crept over me. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something watching, waiting. That night, the dreams came. Dark, fragmented visions of open water and whispering voices. I woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. I avoided my cabin as much as possible after that. I spent more time wandering the ship, but even that didn't help. The air seemed heavier, like the ship itself was pressing down on me. On the 5th day, I saw him again, the man in black. He was on the upper deck, standing near the railing, looking out over the ocean. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to him. There was something about the way he stood there, so still, so detached from everything. Without thinking, I walked up to him. "Nice day, isn't it?" I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond. He didn't even turn to look at me. He just stood there, staring into the distance, as if he hadn't heard me at all. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I forced myself to stay. "Are you enjoying the cruise?" Still nothing. Me? I should have walked away. But instead, I stayed, waiting, as if I expected him to suddenly snap out of whatever trance he was in and say something. He never did. After what felt like an eternity, I left him there, feeling more unnerved than before. That night, I heard the knock again. 3 slow taps. This time, I didn't get up. I stayed in bed, listening as my heart pounded in my chest. The knocking stopped, but then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving away from my door and down the hall. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I got up, threw on a robe, and opened the door. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim glow of the emergency lights. Far down the corridor, I saw a figure. A man. He was walking slowly, purposefully, disappearing into the shadows at the end of the hall. I knew it was him, the man in black. I asked around, trying to figure out who he was. No one seemed to know. The crew was tight-lipped, acting like they hadn't seen him at all. It didn't make sense. He was always there, sitting at dinner, standing on the deck. How could no one notice him? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every distant thud made me jump. Around midnight, I heard the knock again. 3 slow taps. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I threw open the door, ready to confront whatever was out there. He was standing there, the man in black. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hat, but I could feel his eyes on me. My skin prickled with cold fear. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, he slowly raised a hand and pointed down the hall, toward the deck. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just kept pointing. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of my cabin. The hallway was eerily silent as I walked past him, feeling his presence at my back. At the door to the upper deck, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle, but before I could touch it, the door creaked open on its own. A cold gust rushed in. The deck was empty except for her. The missing woman stood at the railing, staring at the sea. Her back was to me, her body stiff. Something was wrong. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if broken. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Then she turned. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. A whisper filled the air, from nowhere and everywhere. "Help me." Then she stepped back. I lunged forward, but the moment my fingers grazed her arm, she vanished. No splash, no sign she had ever been there. Just the dark, endless ocean. A hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around. The deck was empty. The man in black was gone. By morning, no one mentioned her. No one seemed to remember. But I do. And when I checked my hands, my fingertips were wet with salt water. Gippsland's countryside was supposed to offer a quiet retreat, a break from the noise of city life. Instead, we arrived at a decaying farmhouse with dark, hollow windows and a single flickering porch light. The silence around us felt unnatural, the wind stirring the brittle grass in restless whispers. Mia shot me a hesitant glance, but after driving for hours, there was no turning back. An older woman met us at the door, thin, sharp-eyed, her gaze assessing us like a shopkeeper taking stock. "Shoes off at the door. No noise after 8:30, she instructed, her voice devoid of warmth. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and something sickly. A scent just faint enough to keep me second-guessing what it was. She led us down a narrow hallway lined with aged portraits, their faces frozen in solemn expressions, their eyes following us as we passed. A cold unease settled in my stomach, but I swallowed it down and kept walking. Before I could answer, the old woman cut in. "No showers longer than a minute. No hot water. And you must ask before using the kitchen." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be just down the hall if you need anything." I didn't like the way she said that. That night, as we lay in the uncomfortable twin beds, something heavy thumped against the wall outside. I sat up, heart hammering. Another thump closer this time. Then came a slow, dragging sound, like something large was scraping against the side of the house. "What the hell is that?" Mia whispered, clutching the blanket. A deep, guttural snort answered. It came from just outside the broken window. My stomach clenched. Slowly, I turned my head, peering through the jagged glass. In the moonlight, I saw it a massive, shadowy figure, its breath fogging up the glass. A horse. The woman's horse. But something was wrong with it. Its eyes were wide, rolling, as if it was in some kind of frenzy. Its mouth hung open slightly, revealing teeth that looked far too sharp for a normal horse. It pressed its muzzle to the shattered window, nostrils flaring. The doorknob rattled. Mia stifled a gasp as we both turned toward the door. A long, deliberate scratch ran along the wood, slow and steady. It wasn't the horse. The air grew thick, suffocating. A sound, faint at first, began to echo through the room, whispering. It was coming from the vent above the beds. Straining my ears, I made out the words. "You're awake." Then, as if the house itself were breathing, the walls creaked and groaned. Something shuffled in the hallway, the sound of bare feet dragging across the floor. My stomach churned as I realized whatever it was, it had stopped just outside our door. The knob turned. A deep, wet breath. The door creaked open an inch, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness beyond. A shadow stretched across the floor, its shape human but wrong. Elongated fingers curled around the edge of the door. The whispering grew louder, merging into a chorus of voices, overlapping, frantic, desperate. Mia whimpered, gripping my wrist. My breath hitched as the door opened wider, inch by inch, revealing nothing. The hallway was empty. But the whispering hadn't stopped. It was inside the room now. Something cold brushed against my shoulder. That was enough. "Get your stuff." "Now," I hissed at Mia, my voice barely above a whisper. We grabbed our bags, leaving half of our things behind, and bolted for the door. The hallway was darker than before, the air thick with something rotten. As we passed the old woman's room, I saw her door was ajar. Inside, the dim glow of a candle flickered, casting shadows on the walls. She was sitting upright in her bed, staring at us with wide, unblinking eyes. She didn't say a word, She didn't move. She just watched. We ran, down the hall, through the front door, into the freezing night. Our car was parked down the road, but we didn't stop running until we reached it. My hands fumbled with the keys as Mia kept looking over her shoulder. The house was still, too still. The tires kicked up gravel as we sped away, the engine's growl breaking the suffocating silence. Mia exhaled, her voice unsteady. "Did you see her?" She was watching us leave, like she was waiting for it. I didn't answer. My hands were locked on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The farmhouse shrank in the distance, barely touched by the weak, flickering glow of the porch light. But in the doorway, the old woman still stood. And beside her, something else. Something unnaturally tall, its limbs too long, its face swallowed by shadow. We never talked about it again. I never checked to see if the place was even real. Have you ever experienced something creepy or unexplainable while traveling? Share your story.